Welcome to my channel, Comic Book Noise, where we talk about my comic book company, Digital Noise, where we explain the characters and the storylines within the Digital Noise universe. Today we're going to talk about, under the subject of comic book issues, we're going to talk about, is it wrong to have politics in comic books? Well, that's a question that's been asked for about, I would say, a couple of years, maybe even a decade now. And especially, I think, in 2014, when Marvel started to include diversity, and as their main focus was to have diversity within their comic book company and their comic book brand. So there were many opposers of this goal that Marvel had set up for themselves to have more inclusivity within their comic book brand. And a lot of other groups that were opposed to this came up, such as Comicsgate, and just other independent people of the same think that aren't a part of Comicsgate thought that politics should not be a main focus within the comic book genres. But there has been a long history since the beginning of the comic book industry on the superhero genre of comics. And it all started, I guess you could say, with Superman. And as we know, Superman was created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster. And it was created in, the book was published in 1938 on April 18th. And Superman wasn't itself a particularly political book itself or character, but Superman was created from a strong political point of view. And the two creators, Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, were two Jewish young men that experienced of racism. They experienced hate pointed towards their culture and their people, and just within the industry itself of being an artist, they struggled through the time period of when Jewish people that were artistic had very few avenues to work professionally as an artist. And during that time, in the 1930s and above that, Jewish people weren't allowed in certain areas right off in certain professions in the art field. But what the Jewish people that were artistic, that flourished during that time in America, was the comic book industry. And the comic book industry, back in those times, when they did like Love Comics and comics outside, that wasn't a superhero comic book, or horror stories and things like that. They were considered rags. They weren't considered a serious book medium or a medium for artists to grow. So Jewish people that were artistic flocked to that profession in the comic book medium. And so they got into that medium in hopes of graduating to better level jobs during that time. So this is how Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster started Superman. But Superman wasn't actually created originally in the 1930s. When they were young kids, they had a concept of a Superman that was different than we know and love of today. The Superman that they created back during that time, when they first created Superman, was more of a Nazi villainous point of view. And this Superman was created during the time of the Hitler regime, or during the time when not the Hitler regime, but the Nazi regime and the Nazi ideas were flourished of creating the perfect human. And so the original Superman was a young man that was experimented on to become the perfect human from a Nazi point of view, where he was inducted with some kind of chemical to make himself a superhuman. So instead of super strength, he would like be clairvoyant and have powers of mental telepathy and things like that. And it was totally different than the Superman than we know of today. And so, but this Superman that he originally created was corrupt. He did things for his own selfish gain. He didn't do anything for other people. He did everything for himself, and so he used his power for himself and his selfish reasons, and so that would be for evil, and wanted to show and display what the superhuman, a Superman, would be, and from a Nazi perspective. But as we went along, when they created this idea, the ideas changed and then life happened to them and all this other stuff until they got a break to come back together again to do a comic book. So they were hired to do and create a comic book. And so that's why we have the Superman that we have today. And the idea of this Superman was to fight the opposite of what their original Superman was for. And so this Superman was selfless. He fought for the good of people. He was basically an anti-Nazi, from their perspective of what a Superman is from their own vision. And so that's how Superman came to be. And it came from a strong political standpoint, from the experienced lives of Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster and their experience with the world. And so this is their vision of what a Superman is. So that, from that standpoint, was a political outlook in the comic book genre. And that was the first superhero comic book that ever came out and that was created. But in 1941, there was another comic book company that was on the rise, and they created the first Human Torch and Submariner. And so these were like superheroes, but they weren't so politically based. They were purely for entertainment purposes. But in 1941, this new company called Marvel came out with their first heavy hitter superhero, and that was Captain America. So with Captain America himself, that right there is a political standpoint. There's nothing you can argue about Captain America being the epitome of what a political book is. And so that was way in 1941, and that was one of the first comic book issues that Marvel created. So Marvel was already on a political point of view already, and everybody loves and knows about Captain America until this day. So even from that standpoint, just the character himself, he wears the American flag, he does all this and that as a patriot. And so just from that standpoint, that's a political point of view itself. But it didn't stop there. Okay. Captain America had its first issue of the cover of Captain America. One of the few first issues was him knocking out Hitler. And so the Captain America that was created back then was created by Jack Kirby and Joe Simon. So these two guys were Jewish guys that hated Nazis. They hated Nazis and the whole Nazi initiative and agendas because, of course, they were Jewish. And so, as we know, Jack Kirby was a soldier that fought in World War II, and he fought against Hitler and the regime. But they created Captain America even before the World War II even happened. They fought to express themselves of showing how the Nazi regime was so wrong and what they were doing against their people and how America should get involved in stopping the Nazi and Hitler regime in Germany. And they actually created this character to fight against this evil that was being bestowed on their people in Germany. And so this was kind of like a foretelling of what reality would happen in World War II. And so that has a strong political background in comics, which is the Captain America title. And so the title of Captain America and the story behind it and why he was created and one of his first storylines was totally political. So just the point right there that politics plays a strong component within the comic book superhero genre. And so, but during that time in 1941, as Marvel was creating Captain America, another symbolic milestone was created that was iconic and that will ever be iconic, that DC created at the same time at DC Comics, was Wonder Woman. And so we all know what Wonder Woman represents and who she represents and what she's about. She's for fighting for female power. So Wonder Woman was basically for feminism. And she was the Wonder Woman is a symbol of feminism. And we all know Wonder Woman's backstory, where she came from a land far, far away called Paradise Island, which were all women, and men were forbid to even step on the grounds of Paradise Island. Wonder Woman is basically a demigoddess, and she's just as capable, just as strong, just as cunning, just as smart, just as much as any man or even Superman could be. And so she symbolizes that women can do anything and women can save the world. Women can be the heroes of the world. And DC created that milestone, and so that was from a political point of view itself. Like, you can't get any more political than that. Like, even today, there's some people in the comic books that are against certain diversities. They're against gays initiative. They're against transsexuals. They're against women being too overly powerful within the comic books, and but they don't realize these things that they are against. That was how the comic book superhero genre was being created in a strong and original way during those times. During the time in the 1940s, to see a woman saving a man, or to see a superhero fighting a war in Nazi Germany, totally political. Like, on the standards today, there's nothing as political as those things that were created back then, because those things were barely even to be talked about or even thought about during those times. You know, and today we're arguing over if a gay character should be created or not within the comic book, or if, you know, just a whole lot of different political issues that show diversity and representation of different people that are around the world. DC, where we see the Legion of Superheroes, and they were created in 1958. So the Legion of Superheroes was a book that I picked up in the 1980s and 90s. And the Legion of Superheroes, just from face value, just showed diversity and the political stance and what I was interested in as a kid. And so when I witnessed the Legion of Superheroes, I thought, wow, this is a cool book. Not only it had different races, it had different aliens, different species, which I think there are different living things out in the universe somewhere. It would be interesting to see what it could be like in the near future, or sometime in the far future, or whatever, what that would look like as a universal type of thing. So, but that's a whole nother subject to talk about, whatever. But right now we're talking about politics and comics. So just with that alone, of showing different people. So you had on the Legion of Superheroes, you had Tarak, so many different ones. You had Dawnstar, Karate Kid, many different type of races of people. Not only races, but you have Chameleon Boy, you have different other aliens that represented aliens from around the universe. And so just within that, that was political, because you'll get political beliefs, political backgrounds, different political cultures, just within that comic book. And during the time where Mark Wald was writing the book in 2004, the Legions of Superheroes were more talking about sexual differences, where you had Chameleon Kid was androgynous, and you had different types of viewpoints of sexuality and things like that, which was very interesting in the comic book. The Legion of Superheroes is a pretty diverse and political book within itself. But now we have the last blockbuster movie that happened from this comic book is the Black Panther. But the Black Panther, the comic book, was created in 1966, and they were created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And Black Panther was the first black superhero comic book that was created, and that showed representation for people of African descent. So this was a huge milestone in the 1960s. Not only was he as powerful, as capable as Captain America or even Iron Man, and smart as Iron Man, he was also a king of his own kingdom, which is called Wakanda. And Wakanda was all inclusive of all African people within that tribe, and they were separate from any other government or any other political foreign entities. They were all within their own space, within their own political ideals and culture, and they didn't coincide with anyone else's outside of that. So just from that standpoint, to create a black superhero, that was the first of his kind, to him being powerful, rich, intelligent, political, it was just a milestone and something that the world has never seen before. And so this is the epitome of a political standpoint itself. And during that time, in the 1960s, there was also another comic book that was created just before that. And so it's a comic book that's dear to my heart, that I've always loved. It was like the first comic book I've ever picked up in my life when I was a kid. And that's how I got into comic books. And that comic book title is called The X-Men. So originally, the X-Men were an all-white group of kids that were considered mutants and that were considered different. They had different abilities than normal people. Where you had Marvel Girl, who was celebrity, you had Cyclops, who had atomic beams, you had Angel, who had wings, who could fly, you had Beast, who was a beast, but he was very agile and strong and things like that. And you had Iceman, who was the manipulator of ice and temperatures and things like that. And so during that time, word on the street said that the X-Men represented people being gay and the LGBT community during that time. They couldn't literally, or they felt that they couldn't literally do a comic book about gay people, but a lot of gay people could identify with these characters because these characters were shunned in regular society. These characters were being prejudiced against by regular society. They weren't normal. They were freaks that society wanted to shun. And so during that time, especially during that time, the LGBT community was also in that framework in the 1960s and in America. But the X-Men was a very cool and strange book during that time, and it was almost like a cult-like following during that time. But the real change came for the X-Men in the 1970s. And that's when they had a whole new group and a whole new team. Because the X-Men of old wasn't selling that well, so they wanted to reinvent the X-Men and recreate the Will, but in a different way. And they did. And what they did was come up with almost like on a Legion of Superheroes type thing, that they created all these different characters from different nationalities, different races, different cultures, different backgrounds. That's where you had Storm. She was from Africa. You had Sunfire. He was from Tokyo. You had Thunderbird, who was indigenous Indian. Not only with races, you also had different people from different countries. You had Banshee, who's from Ireland. You had Morna Matagor, who's from England. You had many different types of superheroes or mutants that had not only different powers and that were strange to the world, that was not regular or normal. You also had people from different cultures and different backgrounds who have these different powers. So with all of that, that was so political within itself. X-Men is the perfect comic book title to show that politics works in comic books. I think that to not have a comic book without a political idea is kind of a lame and dead comic book, because you're not really saying or telling anything. It's just pure entertainment. And there's room for entertainment for a superhero genre type comic book. But if you constantly don't have that, I think the comic book itself doesn't have a certain life to cling on to for the long haul. And I have to say, like in these days, some people may have a point about comic books being political, because I think, how can I say it? A lot of comic books don't work politically because I think the standpoint is to push a strong political agenda instead of telling good stories. I totally agree with politics being in comic books, but it's how you tell the story, how you craft the story together to make a solid comic book. How to incorporate a great character, to have great writing. And I think what's ruining the comic book today is not political in a certain way. It's the way it's told and how the politics are handled within the comic book. I think that the major comic books today are full of, the industry is full of nepotism, it's full of mediocrity because of the nepotism. It's also rehashed artists within the comic book industry, which is, you always need new blood for things to live on. You can't just rely on the same old formula. You need to take chances with new people, new talent, new mind think to keep something going and fresh. And because then it won't seem like a hack type of thing where you do something, do a story, or I know this person, my friend needs a job. They kind of can write a little bit, maybe we can do this. Or it's just a lot of nepotism within the comic book industry today, and it's kind of ruining the idea of how politics in comics worked in the past. And it comes from creativity, giving people a chance, looking at real talent, giving new people that haven't had their voice spoken out, being spoked out, and trying new talent with that. And it's not about comic books just having agendas. It's about the comic books should inspire to tell their story, to tell their political point of view, to inspire people, to get them into the characters, to help live through the characters, to see all sides of points of views. but not really preach and get into it because you'll deflect a lot of people at the same time. I mean, I feel that politics plays an important part in a comic book, a successful superhero comic book. But if you need to craft the story better, and then there's just some people who hate diversity, who are racist, pigs, and sexist, and all that other stuff, and there's nothing you can help with that. But on the other side, you need to see how comic books are made, because I know from Marvel and a lot of black characters from Marvel and DC, a lot of black characters are created from white males. I think instead of just having diversity in the characters within the comic book, you need to have diversity with the storytellers and the talent behind the comic book. I'm not saying that, every black character should be created by a black person, or every gay character should be created by a gay person, or, or vice versa. I think if there's, there could be a black man creating a white character. You can have a more white, more multicolored and racial people that are in the comic book industry, that are writers, that are editors, that are decision makers, that are advisors, that are, just different types of people behind the scenes to do comic books. As you're showing comic books in front of the audience of the diversity of characters, it needs to also show diversity within the industry as well. Because me working through Marvel and DC and knowing the comic industry as I know it, I don't see that much diversity. And it's always been white male driven, but now it's on a different slant. Like they're changing it, but now it's still more of a white establishment type of industry. And it should change with diversity of sometimes having executive editor that's of a different race or a different color, or that's black, or that's Asian. Well, you already have that. Or that's, just different types of races that haven't had a chance. That definitely, probably, there are people out there of different colors and races that have that ability to be an executive editor of any publishing company. They should be given that chance. That should show representation behind the scenes in the industry. And so that would be more of a stronger story told within the comic book industry from a different point of view. But, we still have the comic book industry going. It's not as strong as it used to be in the superhero genre, but I still think the comic book industry has a lot of different stories to tell from a lot of different people from different backgrounds and different cultures and different races. And so that's just my point of view in politics and comics. I think comics and politics work very well together, and I think that makes a great comic book superhero genre book that would be a top seller of any title if you put the formula together right. And so those are my thoughts on it. And just, write down in the comment section and let me know what you think about it. But If you like what you're hearing, like, share, subscribe. Be safe out there, be careful, and take care.